Could you talk a bit about how to be liberated from the inner thought or urge that only when you do something you are someone? It often feels that only when you do something you are worthy of life. It is as if it never is possible to do the right thing. You should do something else independently of what you are actually doing. Only when you do something, you are someone. It's really interesting, this. So I'm so sorry for bastardizing all the research and making this oversimplistic. But I forget a lot of things that I learn and I can't repeat it in an accurate way. But I try my best. So I remember watching this documentary about gorillas or apes or something. Apes, I think it was. And I remember that they beat humans in doing immediate memory tasks. But they couldn't do long-term memory tasks or something like this. But they could beat humans in doing complex memory tasks in the moment, because that's how they survive. So if we come from chimpanzees, which we most probably do, we evolved from chimpanzees. So they're very good at immediately remembering things. So you can imagine like they're in the trees and they're like going really rapidly between branch to branch, and they're deciphering like what they can eat and what they can't at a very rapid pace, and their focus is very much about their memory in this moment. Whereas when we descended from the trees, humans descended from the trees, we had to adapt to this new environment where, like up in the trees, we kind of had this advantage. A lot of animals and predators couldn't get us, and our survival was very immediate. Like if a predator did come, then we were in this big group and we had this strength in this group, and it was a very like immediate rebellion that would happen. Whereas when we descended onto the ground, there were so many more predators that came for us, and there were so many more dangers. Or maybe it wasn't that there was so much more, it's just we weren't used to it. But we had to develop this long thinking, so this long thinking through time. So we began to wander from the trees, and we had to begin to think about a home, about a safe place, because if we were just exposed, like the tree is a safe place for us to be in, up the tree, but if we're just living on the flat ground, we have to think about a home at night, we have to think about safety at night, and then this is a different type of thinking to living up in the trees. Then we have to think about possible leopards or lions or the chimpanzees or all these different animals. Then we also have to think about hunting. So in the trees with the chimpanzees, it's a lot more opportunist. They're eating the leaves, they're eating the berries, and then they'll eat some animal that comes into their territory. Whereas when we went onto the flats, we began to kill these big hunts, and then we had to store this big hunt, look after this big hunt. And what happened through our evolution is we got more and more complex in the timeline. And then as we got more and more complex in the timeline, we began to communicate and made it even more complex. And as soon as we began to communicate about our environment, which made us better at surviving on the flat ground with a more complex environment, so as soon as we started communicating about this, we began to believe that that is who we were. But you have to remember, our communication was based on doing, surviving, and time. It was all based around survival. So of course, your sense of self and the doership are interlinked, because that's how our language evolved. It didn't evolve to appreciate the sunset. It didn't evolve to appreciate the clouds or think about how beautiful a flower is. That was something that evolved after that. It evolved as our speaking evolved as totally as an ability to survive in a group and to make that survival more secure and more safe. And then we began to believe that we were that conversation. So I am going to pick up wood, I am going to collect fish, I am going to... So of course your identity and doership is bound together. So what we often feel is that, ironically, our self-worth is based on what we do. It's kind of got all mixed up. So our self-worth is based on what we do in time, whereas the chimpanzees couldn't really think about their self-worth and who they were. They just were. But because we began to think laterally, that's what it's called, laterally, we began to think about who we were and whether we were good enough or not good enough. The chimpanzee could momentarily experience it. So if it let down the group, or if it did something bad, or if it stole food and got caught, it could momentarily feel unwanted, but not like the human can, because the human believes it is something, which isn't true, and then it identifies with that, and then it has this idea of my worth and my lack of worth. And then our worth has kind of got muddled in with what we do for the group, which is obvious that it would, because it was all originally based on survival. So that is why Wilfred. And it's just seeing beyond that. So that's the way in which the body's being programmed, and the way in which it wants to move. And then deeper than that, below that, there is this love of being, this sense of beingness, this empty looking that's below that. So that what lays on top is this sense of being you that needs to be something else from what it is. So therefore it does, because that's what it knows how to do, is to do something in time. I will build a house, I will teach a class, I will be famous, I will be a museum, just a museum. I will be something.